Hey, good morning. Happy Saturday.
Yeah, September, middle of September.
I feel like the hottest day of the week was just the hottest day of the year was like last week. It was burning up, but we were also on a roof and installing some solar panels, so that probably added to it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The fires in California added to our heat.
Jeez, it's burning up right now.
Yeah, but it's definitely cooled down. The last time we talked and I was out on the porch, it was hot.
Yeah, it is like I
And
think the
this morning,
transition.
it's just kind of nice. But our sky is completely smoke, but it's up high.
Yeah, it looks pretty gray
So
out.
it's, yeah.
So let's get into some topics that I find really interesting that I think it'd be fun to share some insight with. And let's try and just talk about it as if you and I both know what one another's saying already and like we understand. Um, so the first question I have that I think would be interesting is like what is your understanding of schizophrenia and like mental health and where that where the illness stems from and what the yeah.
Well, there's at least a half a dozen issues, but, number one, of course, is how we think.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm convinced at this ripe old age of 68
Mm-hmm.
that everything is a reflection of our thoughts, our life, our health, our fortunes, our misfortunes, our health, our diseases.
Mm-hmm.
And so by all means, our thinking, it's interesting, that where do thoughts come from? But then thoughts are turned into words. And the neatest thing that I understand about words is that they form a mold
Mm-hmm.
that is then filled with spirit. And spirit manifests those words into physical reality. So that when we have a plan, it begins with an idea, we start talking about it, and then spirit, that which is something greater than ourselves that is responsible for ourselves in the material world, fills up whatever our words are forming. And so that's especially true of mental health and what we call mental illness. So all of the different varieties of mental illness, first and foremost, we need to change how we think about ourselves and about our lives and about others. And I don't think that you can correct an underlying manifestation without transforming how you think. And we've talked about Kelly Brogan, a psychiatrist in New York City that's written books and does lectures and is just brilliant. And she was the first one that I ever heard say that all psychiatric drugs make you worse. And that was a pretty bold statement coming from a psychiatrist. And she qualified it and said that in the case of psychosis, that using a drug to kind of bring people back to earth is okay, but it should only be done for a couple of weeks. And then her emphasis mirrors what I've been taught, and she, I think, has gone to many of the seminars and has studied a lot of what I've studied in what is loosely called functional medicine. And it has to do with getting healthy. And so what is healthy? Um, Healthy is eating non-toxic, nourishing food and eating it on a schedule, exercising, resting, and being full of gratitude. So that's how we get healthy. And the evidence now is overwhelming that our digestive health has to do with our mental health. The barriers that we have to our external world, which is full of bugs and fungus and viruses and parasites and toxins, we're like a test tube, and we have to remain separate from our external world. And where we interact with that world is primarily by what we put in our mouths. And the intestinal barrier, which is in the small intestine, that's where food and drink that we put into our mouths is broken down, and then it's passed through this semi-permeable membrane, which keeps some stuff out and lets other stuff in. That's where all the action is. And right where that barrier is our largest portion of our immune system. Because our immune system, two parts, white blood cells and antibodies. Antibodies' purpose is to identify anything that's not human, our personal bodies. So anything that's not Chuck or that's not Stuart, our immune system is built to create an antibody, which then combines with that foreigner and takes it out through the kidneys. So, and then we have the white blood cells that also help in that process, but it's particularly the antibodies. And we've heard a lot about antigen testing with the COVID. And an antigen, by definition, is a foreign protein that stimulates an antibody. That's what an antigen is. And so that intestinal barrier is where our immune system is, but this is also the digestive tract is also where I think something like 60% of our hormonal system is. And
Wow, I never heard that.
so that's, and that includes the neurotransmitters, which are the brain chemistry that we hear about. If you've got a mental illness, you've got something wrong with your brain chemistry. Well, that's primarily about 15 different neurotransmitters. And their job is to help the brain cells, the nerve cells, communicate with each other in what's called a synapse. And in that synapse, the hormone is actually, manufactured. Well, not necessarily manufactured, but it's stored and it's released to help a nerve fire from one side to the other. And so, serotonin and dopamine and epinephrine and these different neurotransmitters are responsible for our brain firing. Well, it turns out that our brain also has a blood-brain barrier. And so things that are circulating in the blood, some of them are not necessarily really good for our brain. Our brain is highly, it's filtered. And so what gets into the brain is supposed to be very, very like high octane fuel, no toxins, no additives in it. And what they've shown over the last 10, 20 years of studying the microbiome, which is the gut bacteria and the functioning of the intestinal barrier, is that if that intestinal barrier is inflamed, which is loosely called leaky gut, that it affects our blood-brain barrier. And so we have leaky brain. So lo and behold, leaky brain is kind of what allows toxins and different foreign proteins to get into our brain, and it messes with those synapses and it messes with our brain chemistry. And when our brain chemistry, look when you're tired, look when you're exhausted, how your brain, is affected by that. If you go without sleep, sleep deprivation is torture.
Yeah.
And how many people are insomniac? There's a huge percentage of people that don't sleep well. And that affects, if you go without sleep for a night, the next day you're not functioning too well. So imagine if your brain is leaking and that you have that kind of chronic stress, and it then results in a imbalance of the neurotransmitters.
Mm-hmm.
So lo and behold, if you help your gut and you heal your leaky gut, that goes a long ways towards then healing leaky brain. And so it turns out that in my experience of working with some people that have had diagnosis of schizophrenia for 20 years that are in their 70s. I had an opportunity in this last few years to work with someone like that. And my focus was on getting him healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't really necessarily treating, quote, the schizophrenia, but, looking at all of the underlying issues. And he had the typical issues where he was sensitive to different foods, which were causing inflammation, which causes an imbalance and a toxicity and a malnourishment to the whole body, including the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And he had, blood sugar issues like so many people. So by getting him healthy, we got to the point where he was having some symptoms where he would all of a sudden forget where he was and just kind of go into a sort of a semi-conscious state where he'd start babbling. He wouldn't be able to speak, and he would just kind of forget where he was. And,
Mm-hmm.
he would spend the whole day in the bathroom. And it turns out that as I researched the drugs that he was taking for the schizophrenia, I found that one of them had a side effect of lowering sodium. And when your body gets low on sodium, it's sort of a dehydration, and it starts to affect everything in your body. And so he would have these tremors, and he would lose, this consciousness. I started saying to him, look, I think that, these, your symptoms right now are related to the drug that you're taking.
Mm-hmm.
And he had tried to get off the drug a year before I started working with him, and he had to be hospitalized, and he nearly died trying to get off of these benzodiazepines, which is a really hard addictive substance. It's worse than trying to get off of, cocaine or alcohol. It's really, you hear about these people that have been put on these psychiatric drugs for many decades, and to get them off of them is as difficult a challenge as just about anything. So I found a psychiatrist who was a young guy that had gone to, Johns Hopkins, was highly trained. He looked at some of the tests that I had done with this man, and he listened to my suggesting that the drug that he was taking was responsible for this low sodium, which was responsible for his symptoms. And he agreed. And he was able to get him off of those drugs, like, I think in 4 weeks. It was miraculous. And because he didn't want to get off the drugs, he says, look, I'm going to work with you, but don't tell me that I'm going to get off these drugs. So when I started suggesting that to him, he wasn't happy. But this psychiatrist went along, got him off the drugs, and he's done well. And the point of that is that I'm quite sure that the reason it was relatively easy to get him off of those drugs that he'd been on for over 20 years was because we got him healthy first. And if we hadn't gotten him healthy first, he would have had the same problems that everybody else has. So, turns out that the same thing is true of mental illness as of physical illness. If we have panic and anxiety, it has to do with a physical problem, and that can have to do with stress hormones and reproductive hormones even. Estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone, they're not just for reproduction. And our other stress hormones, our cortisol in particular, that really has a whole lot to do with panic and anxiety. So, and that now they're saying that the number one cause of death in the world is depression, above cardiac and above cancer. Depression is now the leading cause of death.
Wow.
And the statistic came out just in the last month that in the month past, 25% of people between 15 and 25 contemplated suicide in the United States. 25% of young people, because of COVID, because of just how topsy-turvy our social, societal structure is right now, that 1 out of 4 young kids actively contemplated suicide last month.
Wow. Isn't that pretty common for most like young adults to contemplate suicide from the age of like 15 to 24 or something? Like that's usually
Yeah.
like the transitional period into adulthood. And
Well, so what's behind that? We just talked about it. Let me ask you the question. Why are young adults contemplating suicide? And it is greater than it's ever been before, but it may be that's true because we're changing from children to becoming adults. So that's a big, huge transition. But what's underlying that?
well, there's a few things. One of them is yeah, it's all environmental stuff. So
They're
society,
not healthy.
yeah,
They're not healthy.
the
They're
food,
eating they're eating junk food.
yeah, if you grow up on that, you're pretty depleted and then you don't really have any reserves. And then you're going into a more stressful environment where it's like you're going to have to fend for yourself. And so if you're not exactly fortified, um, then that transition
and
is going to be,
and puberty. I mean, puberty is a big deal
yeah.
where you're starting to, become in your reproductive years, more so with women than with men, but still, puberty for men has its challenges,
Mm-hmm.
but puberty for women is especially difficult. And if you're not healthy, if you're malnourished and toxic, which I'd say 90% of us are,
Yeah.
then it's going to affect your mental and emotional, health.
Yeah. So what are some interesting like factoids about schizophrenia that people wouldn't necessarily know or um
The biggest one is that get healthy
yeah. So like
and so if you're put on a drug for schizophrenia, and many children are put on drugs and they're
mhm,
kept on drugs for decades, that if they didn't change their diet, because the people on these drugs, they oftentimes are like an alcoholic. They drink, not only alcohol but lots of coffee. They smoke cigarettes. They don't eat on a regular schedule. Their blood sugar is out of control.
mhm.
So unfortunately, I think that what's missed in schizophrenic treatment is physical well-being.
Get in that. Yeah. I'd say
and
that's the mist in pretty much everybody's diagnosable diseases.
and also how we think. If
Yeah.
we have poor self-esteem, and isn't that one of the biggest challenges of these kids? Their self-esteem
Yeah.
is lacking, and that means that they feel guilty for being who they are, and they're inadequate, and they're I mean, I read something about adolescent women that they have about 20 things that they have to measure up to, and compared to an adolescent male,
Mhm.
women have 15 times the challenges.
Societal pressure.
They have to be smart, but they can't be too smart. They got to be pretty, but they can't be too pretty. They got to, they're they have to be athletic, but they can't be too athletic. I mean, it's the challenges for them is just, and how they look. Oh my gosh. So the self-esteem, and that has to do with forgiveness.
Mm.
And
Did a cool
Marianne
thing last
Williamson
I
has
had a
said
tough
that.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I had a tough time going to bed last night. I ate some chocolate kind of in the afternoon, and I don't take any stimulants, and so this chocolate like really ramped me up. And so, but I did this thing where I went through and like forgave everybody, and then like forgave myself, and that relaxation meditation, like I went to bed because with caffeine you have thoughts, you have ideas, and it's exciting, so it's hard to like sleep. And the process of going to bed, which I've learned how to do really really well, is literally just shutting everything off and getting into like a relaxed state. So Yeah, and like I was trying, I was like, am I gonna read? What am I gonna do? And then I just went through this like mind meditation thing, and it was really powerful. It was potent. It felt great. I mean, um,
Learning how to forgive is not an easy subject.
no, and I could feel the resistance, you know, like in some cases. Um,
And the people we judge the harshest are ourselves.
exactly. It's
So
like
learning
yeah,
how to forgive yourself,
right. And
that's
then
the
what I
key.
when I went towards myself, I was like, is this gonna change my emotional connection to the world? You know, like, am I willing to interact with myself and others in like a new way now that I'm actively trying to forgive? And it's like, yeah, of course. You know, like it takes this weight off. It was really cool. I highly recommend it. It was good.
It is
Um,
pretty nuts that what life is change,
hmm,
and we all resist change.
yeah, there's something about our evolution, our minds that I
But
don't
that's
know.
what life is. It's
Yeah.
change.
So let's blaze through the. I have like 10 questions. So the other one is, you know, I know you've worked with autistic kids, and that's becoming a really prevalent, um, you know, problem with society. And so, what can you say in working with the autistic kids, and then what are your ideas of where autism even comes from?
Well, autism comes from unhealthy parents,
Like specifically, what do you think? I mean, yes, malnourished.
malnourished and toxic.
Okay, but like
Same
in what?
thing.
So what is this? What does studies show that like where autism stems from? Is it from the pesticides? Is it from vaccinations? Obviously, it's a combination of a lot of things, but
It's
in
well,
general.
it's well, autistic kids. What is common is that they've got gut problems.
Okay, cool. That's really what like that's kind of what I want to show in all of these things is like it's all gut related. It's all, you know.
And really, Stuart, I just had a epiphany, in the last couple of days with foods.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, I've been studying food sensitivity for 20 years, and I've
Mm-hmm.
been blessed to have a couple of phenomenal researchers that have developed testing for food sensitivities, which is looking for antibodies against food. A
Mm-hmm.
food allergy is where you have a histamine reaction, which is an inflammatory, reaction that occurs in your neck and in your head. So allergies are you have an immediate reaction to a food, you get hives, you get a headache, you get a migraine, you get
Puffiness.
sniffles,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's in your neck and your head. As extreme is when you get anaphylactic shock, like to
Oh,
peanuts. And the protocol for that is, you avoid what's making you sick, but you know it. You
yeah.
can tell this is why I got sick. But then they do desensitization shots,
Mm.
and that's pretty much what they do for allergies.
Is that pretty
Then you've got another.
dangerous to do the desensitization?
I don't think so. It's just not everybody that I've talked to after they do it for a while quits, and they're
Okay.
back in the soup.
Okay.
They're kind of back where they were.
Because
It's
I'm
not
really
really.
sensitive to cats, and I mean, I personally
Well,
don't want to live with an animal in the house because they're just they're dirty, you know, like they leave debris everywhere. But um, but I also would like not to. I would like to not be sensitive to.
what I was taught by Dr. Vojani is that if you're sensitive to the environment, to
Yeah.
cats, or to perfume, or to pollen, or to dust, or to all of these environmental issues, it's because your body has been filled up with debris
From the food
and
allergies.
well, from foods and bugs and toxins.
Hmm.
And if your body is overwhelmed, if your intestinal barrier is not functioning and you're allowing foods, bugs, and toxins into your system and you're producing antibodies against it, that creates the biggest amount of toxic waste that the body has.
Yeah.
And so if you're sensitive to your external environment, you have to clean up your internal environment. And you do that through food sensitivity elimination and rotation and the basics of blood sugar control and rehab your microbiome with probiotics find out if you're stressed out and malnourished, if you're not producing the right digestive enzymes, take the appropriate digestive enzymes, take anti-inflammatories, different herbs, curcumin, turmeric,
Mm.
ginger, marshmallow root, slippery elm. These are time-tested anti-inflammatories. Then take nourishing, different fats and proteins and amino acids to help nourish the lining of the gut. You got to rehabilitate your gut. And you do that, and then your sensitivity to the external world is improved. It was explained to me that we have like barrels in our system. You got these three external things that are responsible for all disease: a food, bug, or a toxin. And when our skin breaks down and our intestinal barrier breaks down and we get sick, actually the microbes in our gut, if we're not embalmed, digest us. They live longer than we do, and they bring us back down into the earth, and that's what we're made of. We're made of the earth, and so we go back to the earth, and so keeping those barriers strong is the key to being healthy and living in this external world.
And the
So
way to do that is to avoid all the foods, bugs, and toxins that would degrade
yeah,
them.
and not eat the same food every day.
Mm-hmm.
Improve your digestive health, take the probiotics. But it's tricky. I've been doing this for 25 years pretty much. I've
Mm-hmm.
done hundreds of food sensitivity testing. And on the patients that I've got that are really, really the tough ones, I've seen progress, but I felt like I was up against a wall. And so I was searching this last week. Got this one gal that I've worked with for 3 years who used to spend a couple of hours every morning on the toilet with cramping, diarrhea, bloody stools, constipation, bloating. I mean, terrific pain. 2
Miserable.
hours every morning.
Yeah.
And that set the stage for her whole day.
Yeah.
And it led to chronic fatigue, and it led to
Oh, if you're,
migraines, and it
yeah,
led to just a whole host of problems.
how
and
difficult
and
it is to exist.
so she had been to doctors for many, many years, and when I started working with her, and man, we made progress.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, about a year ago, she suffered a concussion from a bicycle accident, and that messed up her gut again, interestingly enough. I mean, which is understandable when you get you understand the the brain and the vagus nerve, which is the 10th cranial nerve, is what controls our gut. So if you hurt your brain, it affects the vagus nerve, the sympathetic nerve to your gut. And of course, your gut has more nerve endings than your brain does.
Mm.
So we've got that second brain in our gut.
Actually,
You know,
it's the first that evolved, and then the brain evolved secondly. So
mm-hmm.
the gut is actually the first.
It's first brain.
Yeah.
So, but she's much better. She doesn't have the cramping. She has a fairly normal stool, which should be
Mm.
the consistency of toothpaste.
Mm-hmm.
So she's no longer constipated. She no longer has diarrhea. She doesn't have the horrible
What a
cramping.
relief.
Yeah, so that's huge. And I see it. We've done 3 tests in the last 2 years. And the improvement in the foods that she was reactive to are significant. But she had more foods than anybody I've ever tested before. And she still got a few dozen.
Well, it
And
takes
it
years, I
turns,
think. It takes years to
well,
really
it,
feel.
it does, but hers is a really tough one.
Yeah.
And so I got to talk to the PhD that has the patent on the best food sensitivity test in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And he also has a patent on the polio vaccination, which PhDs tried to do for 30 years. He was the one that did it. He has the patent on the most valid HIV test used worldwide. And he also has a patent and FDA approval on a test for corona. And he was able to develop a blood spot where you can do a finger prick and do a test for antibodies against corona. And they've sold a couple million of these in China. So I mean, this guy is really sharp, and he helped me this week with a whole nother library of information, so that, I have great results with the majority of people. This particular patient's system is, exquisitely sensitive. And so now we're talking about cross reactivities, and how you can have, because, when we develop autoimmune, when we start attacking our own cells,
Mm-hmm.
it's because something got into us and caused damage to a particular tissue. And then that damaged tissue is perceived by the immune system as non-self. So we start producing antibodies against damaged tissue. Well, the damaged tissue and the healthy tissue are pretty similar.
Mm-hmm.
And so with something called cross-reactivity or molecular mimicry, we
Mm-hmm.
start attacking our cells. And that's lupus, that's rheumatoid arthritis, that's Crohn's disease, that's Hashimoto's. And that's how that happens. Well, it turns out that when you have food sensitivity, different food families have similarities. And so something that doesn't test positive can be causing you a problem. And because of its family groups. And this gets
More like
into,
molecular structure,
yeah,
because they're not
and
even
and and
similar in
and phenols. I mean, nitty gritty. I'm having to study chemistry
alcohol.
again,
Yeah.
and so to really be a good Sherlock Holmes and a detective, generally cases are easy to solve. When they're not easy to solve, you got to get out your magnifying glass and your microscope.
Get the
And
manual
so
again.
so now and this particular person, not only did she have more food sensitivities than most, she's very meticulous. And, she writes down charts of what foods she's reactive to. When I gave her nutrients, she would make charts of those nutrients and when to take them. And she kept track of it. I mean, she's meticulous and, you know, incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And now it turns out that we're going to have to go to this next level.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know where that next level went. I knew about cross reactivity. For example, I had clients that had reactions to coffee and they never drank coffee. And somebody that you referred me to, had
Yeah.
that problem. And it was like, the guy says, I never drink coffee. And yet, boy, coffee is huge on his list. Well, it turns out that coffee has a similarity to wheat.
Yeah.
And
So
so now
what was your epiphany?
that there is a whole nother level of sophistication that's necessary to apply to the diet. And
Yeah.
that, rotating the diet, which is not eating the same food every day,
Yeah.
is very, very important. And
So
then
what is, go ahead.
eliminating the foods that you found reactive. But then you've got to start realizing, you might have like the Rose family, or the Gourd family, or let's even say, the nightshades. There's similarities in these different foods. And so it's necessary to heal that you eliminate all those foods that are causing the inflammation, because otherwise you're not going to heal.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to eliminate all those foods and take the probiotics and the anti-inflammatories and control your blood sugar in order to really get to a point where your gut is no longer leaking. And then you can, sort of hold your ground. But to
Yeah.
get there, like what you said, it takes a couple, 3 years. I had an inquiry the other day from a patient that I've been working with for a few years. And we've made a lot of progress, but she also has been sick her whole life. And she's in
Mm-hmm.
her 20s. And she has, major depression. She had major skin problems, major gut problems. And we've done a whole lot of good. But I've been working for years, and it takes that. Well, she asked me what supplement is good for liver problems. Well, that throws me for a loop,
Yeah.
because typically, 30 years ago, I would have said, oh, here's a standard processed product for liver.
Mhm.
But from everything that I've learned, I know that that liver problem doesn't exist by itself. And so what other problems are there besides the liver? Because there are literally dozens of things that are good for the liver. And I'm working with a pancreatic cancer patient who had a metastasis to her liver. And so, and I've worked with fatty acid, teachers who, have turned me on to how to detox the liver. And it's phosphatidylcholine.
Yeah.
That's this miraculous, nutrient that helps the liver. The liver's a filter,
Yeah.
and it's an 8-pound filter, and all of the 200 different chemical reactions that occur in the liver happen on the cell membrane. So membrane medicine comes in. You got to really heal the membrane of the cell, and the cell membrane is made up of 85% fatty acids and 15% proteins, and there's 55 fatty acids that make up the 85% of the fat in the cell membrane. And if those fats are not the right ratio, it affects how the cell membrane works. And we have a trillion cell membranes in our body.
So if you're
And
malnourished, then that's
yeah,
huge.
and so if you have a virus, for example, the virus has odd chain fatty acids,
Mm-hmm.
and the human doesn't have odd chain fatty acids.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do a fatty acid analysis and you see odd chains,
Mm-hmm.
you've got a virus, because it was the virus's odd chain fatty acids that got incorporated into your membrane.
Wow.
If you eat hydrogenated fats,
Yeah. Processed
then
food.
then you'll see those hydrogenated fats in the cell membrane.
And then
If
you
you're
just open yourself up to being susceptible to
And here's
getting all this.
a real tricky one, is that if you're taking fish oil,
Yeah.
because everybody takes fish oil these days,
Yeah.
and that's the EPA and DHA. These are
Okay.
the omega-3 oils.
Yeah.
If you take the wrong fish oil that's formulated to have the wrong ratio of the EPA DHA and has an overwhelming dose, lo and behold, your cell membrane will show that you're taking excessive omega-3s. And the sad thing is that our diet, because it's gone so grainy, because grains are cheap,
Mm-hmm.
so our food manufacturing companies make a lot of money by selling us grains.
Fiber. You
And
need
yeah,
fiber.
yeah, and those grains have omega-6s.
Uh-huh.
And so we found out through fatty acid analysis and cardiovascular disease and neuromuscular disease and autism and Alzheimer's and ALS and Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis
Mm-hmm.
that these omega-3s can be an amazing anti-inflammatory. But what they found is that they work for a while and then they quit working. Well, the reason is that it's not the right ratio.
Mm-hmm.
And we're taking the wrong amount, and we're talking the wrong ratio of EPA, DHEA. So that preliminary effect of anti-inflammatory, which is miraculous, after a few months, you reach this plateau and it no longer works. You stop taking them for a while, and then you take them again, and you get the same fantastic reaction for a while. And that problem was solved by Ed and Patricia Kane that do this fatty acid analysis. So, and what they found is that the testing that it's been done at Johns Hopkins at the Kennedy Krieger Paroxysmal Disease Lab, which is a children's disease lab at Johns Hopkins, they found that through doing this fatty acid analysis over the last 20, 30 years, that most people taking fish oil have created an imbalance.
And it's as adverse to their health
Oh,
as not taking it.
yeah,
Yeah.
it throws them
The
into
opposite effect.
yeah.
What do you know
So
about the like the history of food? Because in my mind, it seems like your health is a given. Like this planet, you should just be healthy because this planet is everything else is imbalanced. So, what is
okay.
it about the history of food that has caused so many of us to get sick?
Well, you're the one that champions, don't eat industrialized food.
Yeah.
And so, even 100 years ago, even when I was a kid, I mean, I'm 68. So I grew up in 1960, I was 8 years old. So I lived in the 50s, right, for
Mm-hmm.
8 years. And then in the 60s, well, we didn't have McDonald's.
Mm-hmm.
Shocking. There
Yeah.
weren't fast food restaurants.
I know families still that eat McDonald's 7 meals a week, like,
Yeah.
and
So there
yeah.
was no fast food. There weren't very many restaurants. There
Yeah.
weren't motels.
So what did
There
people
were
do? People,
hotels in cities, and then they would have some downtown restaurants, but there weren't cafes all over the place.
yeah.
And so when we started, eating at cafes and at fast food restaurants, then that food has been adulterated. And so the people that are 100 years old today, they pretty much had a foundation of eating healthy food when they were kids, because that's all there was.
Mm-hmm.
So they were eating grass-fed beef.
Mm-hmm.
They were eating healthy chickens. They were eating healthy eggs. They were eating healthy dairy, where the cows were eating grass. They weren't being fed antibiotics and grains.
So the
So,
percentage of people who are unhealthy 100 years ago, it was a kind of a different kind of people were still unhealthy, but it was from different factors. Would you say, like, the water being dirty is a factor with being,
and in the last 150 years, chemicals came. I mean, we've always used chemicals,
yeah,
but they were using nasty, chemicals back 150 years ago, 100 years ago.
yeah,
And so the lead that was in gasoline, holy smokes. The
yeah,
lead that was in paint, holy smokes.
yeah.
The arsenic and different medications
But like,
were
there's
very,
groups
very
of people
toxic.
that live in, pristine environments still to this day, and they don't have doctors, they don't have dentists. They have all their teeth, 97% of them, and up until they're dead.
And they're not misaligned. Their
No,
teeth are beautiful.
perfect. And yet they're not eating superfoods. They're not drinking purified water. They're existing purely on what their breadbasket and their environment has for them.
And they're
Um,
exercising. They're all walking,
yeah.
8 miles a day.
And they're in the
So
rhythm and the stress level is low and all this kind of stuff. But what do you think the main factors are in the history of our food that has caused, most everyone to be, is it pesticide?
it's been processed.
But I mean, so like spraying the plants
and
with,
and and making white flour and growing corn, and eating way too. These foods are cheap. The
well,
grains are cheap.
I always call
And
it like peasant food or like starvation proof food. You have potatoes, you have rice, you have corn, you have wheat, soy. Like, those are all human engineered foods. Like, corn is a
and they ha-
grass that was genetically, bred to have bigger kernels. Same with wheat. Rice, some places exists wild, and in North America it does. But these foods were not meant for human consumption. And
and
then,
wheat was used to bake bread, which needed gluten. And so over the years, the monks,
you mean yeast? It needed gluten.
gluten.
Okay.
Yeah, gluten is what captures the gas to make bread rise.
Okay.
And so they have bred through not
Okay.
through not through genetic interference, but the monks would take some
Cross
wheat,
pollinate.
and they would pollinate it, so that now the amount of gluten in wheat is 20 times what it was 100 years ago.
Just like they've done with marijuana today. So it's like you selectively choose the traits that you'd like to. Same with cattle. I mean, all these domesticated
And
things.
then chemical fertilizers, that happened after the Second World War.
But health
The
problems
bomb,
existed even in Egyptian times, like,
but
from
that was primarily infections.
infections.
Infections is what killed people because of poor hygiene. They didn't have a very good sewer system.
Yeah.
So human waste, was really a big problem with all the plagues.
I also
And
read that, that sugar, like eating, not sugar, but honey, like over consuming really, high carbohydrates is basically puts our bodies into this kind of shock.
and sugar is what fueled the slave trade.
Yeah.
Sugar only came into popularity a few hundred years ago.
Right.
And
Right.
and so
Before that, it was too expensive.
sugar was called speed.
Right.
And you and I stayed in Cuernavaca at the largest sugar plantation in South America for 200 years.
Right.
We stayed there.
I went
And,
out at nighttime and cut some down and then brought it back to
sugar
the,
canes.
yeah, because we went horseback riding all day. We got chased around by these dogs, and then we came back and I was cutting up the sugar cane on the floor of Cortez's like suite, chipping the tile that was probably hundreds of years old. That was a fun night.
Yeah, so sugar has been a big problem, and then the bad fats. We went when they started when gasoline came around and you had gas engines. Then you could squeeze oils out of different grains that before they couldn't do. And
Mm-hmm.
so, back in the 1850s, people would sell lousy oil that they had, used gasoline powered presses to manufacture from canola and from God knows what, but they sold it as olive oil,
Mm.
and it was fake. And so bad oils, bad refined sugars,
Refined meat.
chemicals. We didn't use chemicals to grow food, 100 years ago. It
Yeah.
was after the Second World War and the munition manufacturers that made the
Nitrogen
bombs.
bombs.
Yeah, they had all this ammonium nitrate, and they started using that as fertilizer. So that was the Green Revolution. And then, Monsanto and Archer Daniels Midland and Bayer all got into the manufacturing of chemical fertilizers and then chemical pesticides.
Mm.
So you've got adulterated food that's been processed too much, and then you've got the emphasis on cheap food, carbohydrates, that fills us up. You go to a restaurant, you get filled up on carbs, and they give you a little tiny piece of steak or chicken or fish.
Yeah.
But most of what you're eating is all the carbs.
They give you chips and bread for free, and then
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
highly decadent butter-filled, plate of whatever. I don't go to
So the
restaurants at
the
all.
the non-organic fruits and vegetables are a big problem.
Yeah. So that's
People
what's
think,
changed drastically, and then that's contributed to our guts just being wrecked. And then in order to
and
heal
then,
the, you got to really eliminate all that
well,
stuff.
how about our doctors? What do they give us?
Drugs
What are they?
from derived from oil.
Toxins.
Yeah.
I
So
was shocked. A couple of years ago, I did an environmental toxicity seminar,
mhm.
and we were trying to figure out, okay, where have you been poisoned? Where'd you get your mercury? Where'd you get your lead? Where'd you get your arsenic? Where'd you get your nickel? Where'd you get your cadmium? Da 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 da. And they said, when you're investigating, trying to find the source of the heavy metals, number one question is asked is what prescription drugs are you taking?
Wow.
Because those prescription drugs are a big part of our toxic burden.
Yeah. Wow.
That's why you go to school for 8 years to figure out how to carefully give these poisons to people. And then it turned, well, I digress.
What do you think what can you tell me about the process of like the slow degradation of health? Like, how does it happen? Like, so you're born a child, maybe you have healthy parents, most likely you don't. And just like, what does the process look like? Like you've dealt with every stage of someone who needs help with getting
It
healthy.
all has to do with, malnourishment, which then leads to toxicity, which leads to cellular damage,
Which is
which
so interesting
then
in a nation where there is abundance of everything. Why is malnourishment, like, it shouldn't be an issue anymore?
it's the I mean it started back when I was a kid, and when we were parents, we were going through this revolution of breastfeeding as opposed to bottle feeding. And it turns out that one of the primary nutrients lacking in formula milk was DHA.
Which is
and
the
and
brain.
yeah, and your brain develops in your first 2 years of life. It grows like 600%.
Wow.
And if you don't have adequate DHA, it doesn't happen, and it can never be repaired.
Wow.
So, and now we've got the C-sections, which are incredibly damaging. and
Yeah.
it has to do with the microbiome. So that, if you don't go through the vaginal birth canal, then you pick up, and you're sterile when you're born. Your gut is sterile, everything is sterile. And so you pick up the bacteria that's going to form the microbiome, which is another organ in our bodies, which is the 3 pounds of bacteria and virus and fungus and parasites that live in us that are our friendly bacteria. It's primarily lactobacillus and bifidobacterium.
Mm.
And if you're C-section, it's streptococcus from nurses' arms and for instruments and from the table that you lie on.
They, even
And
when you're in adulthood, that never changes.
it in the first 2 years, we get to the place of eating regular food and whatnot. So we form the microbiome that we're likely going to keep for the next 50 years.
Based on
And
the
then
foods you eat.
when you get into your 50s and 60s, then you start losing that. That's why it's so important to take a probiotic.
Yeah.
But the streptococcus leads to eczema and dermatitis, childhood allergies, and then obesity.
Mm-hmm.
And so, obesity is rampant.
Mm-hmm.
I think
3 out of 4.
we're maybe the most obese country in the world.
Is it
And
us or is it Mexico?
it's, we're neck and neck,
Yeah.
or we're belly and belly, you know.
Yeah.
But you go to Korea and everybody's skinny.
Yeah. Because they're
And
not eating the refined sugar
we
thing.
were in Korea and Hawaii. Hawaii is pretty fat too. But
Yeah.
we were in Korea for a while, and then we went to Hawaii and we started seeing these big people. Then we flew into Phoenix. Oh my
Mm.
God.
Mm.
And we couldn't find food. You had to go out of security to get food, and then that meant that you had to get back into security. So it was a food desert in this great, big, huge airport in Phoenix.
I mean,
But virtually
all I've
seven,
seen is there's sometimes hard-boiled eggs available, and there's sometimes fruit, but it's disgusting. It's like the lowest barrel
you might find
available,
some beans and some chicken.
and maybe some nuts that don't have like hydrogenated oils in them. But
Pretty
you're looking
tough.
at restaurants. See, I don't even go to restaurants at all. Like I just don't. Every time I go to a restaurant, I'm poisoned somehow. Whether it be
Me too.
the soy spray they use on the grill,
The
um,
aluminum pans they cook in.
yeah, the vinegars that they use made out of corn. Like
Yeah.
it's there's always some way that I'm gonna feel like. And
Me-
the way that I eat is if when I eat, I don't want to feel it. I don't want to feel like it's still there. If
You
I
like to
feel
feel
something, that means that my body's reacting to
it.
it.
That's a
And
good one. I
yeah,
like that.
it totally makes total sense. Like if I get bloated, if I get any sort of reaction, then
What the thing, we've talked about this before, but cancer patients will tell you that they were never sick.
mm-hmm,
And that's why when I quit working in the cancer clinics in Mexico,
mm-hmm,
is when I was hearing that from everybody. And there were, it's like, there's no answers.
mm-hmm,
So I thought, well, I got to study hormones because prostate and breast cancer were hormone derivative. And I didn't learn that much from the doctors in Mexico about hormones. So I worked at a hormone lab.
mm-hmm,
And while I'm at this lab, I'm looking at other tests that these doctors have done on their patients. And by working with 30, I worked with probably a dozen doctors a day. And so I was working with, over, and, I was, I was looking at about 50 labs a day
mm-hmm.
for years. And I began to see the pattern. And what I saw was that childhood diseases don't go away. They morph into our degenerative diseases that kill us. So when a kid has acne or a kid has, eczema or diarrhea or constipation or sinusitis, they're blowing their nose all the time. They're getting colds all the time. And what do they get? They get antibiotics, which destroys
Steroids.
their microbiome.
Yeah.
And then they get to asthma, and then they're on steroids and antibiotics and stuff.
And then
Well,
they're
I
on
saw that
painkillers.
those childhood illnesses that we say that we grow out of, actually people get used to them,
Your
and
body
then
actually kind
people,
of turns off the symptoms, right? For a time being. Like
yeah,
it almost hardens itself. Because as
yeah,
an
but
organism, we get used to our environment. So like you can get used to this hard environment, but you're going to pay the price. You're going to live with symptoms. But yeah, your body turns off the symptoms and then it comes back with a vengeance with like a full blown disease. Yeah.
Yeah, what you and I have seen and what I've seen a lot of is the unmasking of symptoms.
Yeah.
Because the food sensitivities, people don't know that those foods that they're eating are making them sick
Yeah.
because it's a delayed reaction. Whereas an allergy is immediate. You eat peanuts, you swell up.
Yeah.
You eat, green bell peppers, or tomatoes or pineapple or bananas, and you might not feel good 2 or 3 days later, but there's no way that you're going to relate it to what you ate 4 days before.
But that's exactly what it
When
is. I get a
so when
yeah.
when you eliminate those foods, and the reason for rotation is that if you're eating a food every day, you're leaking. If you substitute a food for a food that you've eliminated, and you eat that food every day,
You're gonna get
you'll
a new
become reactive to it. So
right.
that's why you can't eat the same food every day.
And you would say that's the biggest factor in health? One of them, you
It,
have to address that. If you don't, then you're not gonna get better.
it's absolutely remarkable. People that
Yeah.
couldn't afford the testing that I did,
Yeah.
I would tell them to rotate their diet. And in 6 weeks, I'd have people coming in and saying, I've had this problem for 20 years and it's gone
Yeah. It's
just from
such a
rotation.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
rotation.
not a popular idea in the health world yet. People aren't like on that trip yet. And in fact, it's like a difficult one to wrap your head around. It's a difficult one to actually do. Um,
Until you get into a habit, then it's easy.
yeah, until you can
Like
also make sense
today's
of it.
my chicken day, my apples, my pears, my
I do it
cranberries.
loosely. I don't do it. And there's just foods that I don't do it at all, like bananas and peanut butter. And when I do this allergy test, I'm going to be really interested to see if like,
Well, and I've just learned a whole nother level,
yeah,
and it's going to apply to you.
cool.
It's really neat.
Uh,
So yeah, and so that's how we get sick, is that we're chronically malnourished. As a result of malnourishment, your body can't get rid of toxins. So toxicity is secondary to malnourishment. So if you're
mm,
toxic, if what you do is try to detox yourself,
or fast.
you'll actually make yourself worse, because what you should be doing is nourishing yourself. And
And
if
you
you
can't do
nourish
that
yourself,
unless
your
you
body will detox.
right.
And then we get to the immune system and we say, oh, this is good for your immune system. The only thing that really helps your immune system is to get nourished
and
and
avoid
detoxed.
and avoid
You
all
can't
what
directly affect the immune system. The immune system is dependent upon digestion and detoxification.
what
And
does vitamin C do
detoxification,
that it improves the immune
well,
system like crazy?
it substitutes your white blood cells are part of your immune system, and your adrenals, that produce the corticosteroids, right? Which fights the inflammation. So cortisol fights the inflammation from sinusitis. So vitamin C, it turns out that the white blood cells and the adrenal tissue have a huge amount of vitamin C in them.
Yeah.
So if you're deficient in that, you're not going to be functioning too well. So you take a huge, overwhelming amount of vitamin C, and it supports your immune system and your adrenals,
Wow.
and it's remarkable. But
So there's
it's
there's stories. So you're saying that the high concentration is found in the adrenals, and the adrenal glands are above the kidneys or something, right?
Yeah, they're a little like walnut-sized gland that sits on each kidney, and
So
there's
there's
an
a
inside and an outside of the adrenals, and they
there's
produce half a
so
dozen different hormones.
scurvy and the illnesses that stem from a lack of vitamin C, especially in the winter time, or when you don't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. It was a big problem for the trappers in the West, and the Native American population had no issue whatsoever. And eventually, there's a lot of these stories, but eventually, you know a colonial or whatever, a colonist or a trapper asked like one of the Indians, like, how come you guys don't get sick? And it's because when they kill a deer, the first thing they do is, well, maybe they go for the organs, of course, but like they knew that the adrenal gland was just packed full of what they needed. And intuitively, like there's no science proving any of this, but now science proves all of it. But like same with the Amazon, the tribes in the Amazon, they have a catalog of over 300 plants that they knew exactly what they did and how they affected your chemistry. and then biologists go down there and actually confirm, like, oh yeah, how did you guys know this? Like, and that's just so powerful. It's so cool to see what undomesticated humans are connected to. But
Now, I've had shaman before tell me, see this vegetable, it looks like a bone. It's good for your bone. See
yeah,
this vegetable, it looks like your heart. It's good for your heart. And lo and behold, it is.
right. I
So
mean,
there was just some common sense, to a lot of that knowledge. But what they knew about pigments 5,000 years ago.
right. To
I mean,
make paintings that
the
still
Egyptians and the
last
Mayans made a blue that didn't fade.
ever. Yeah.
And
And
they and they
it was
forgot.
it was the most expensive thing in the world. Like to
Yeah,
get
you're
the
right.
paintings that had this blue in it were really, really, and then
And it took them 150 years to figure out how to do it and
yeah,
recreate it today with modern technology.
so
It
cool.
has to do with being unpolluted with no TV, no radio, no phone,
And
no
being
lights.
tuned
You
into
you,
it. Yeah.
you go out into the forest.
Every animal has this, and we are animals as well. And you literally can go into an environment and work on instinct to learn how to incorporate yourself into that environment and what does what. And as domesticated animals, as domesticated humans, we serve authority, so we go based off of what other people say, and we've
How do you
lost
like
that.
the people that say that it's the aliens that made the pyramids?
I have a lot of
because they
friends that
just can't
say that
because they
because they
just
can't
can't
explain it.
conceive of
Yeah.
how intelligent. How did the Mayans have a better system of time measurement in the calendars than we do with the atomic clock today?
Yeah.
How did the Greeks build their temples? I mean, they can't replicate it today with modern tools. and
Yeah.
and so people say, oh, it must be aliens. It's like, no, dude, it was
We've just been
before we
domestic.
got stupid.
It's like a wildebeest, navigating the fucking plains of the Serengeti versus a cow. You put a cow out there, it's gonna like, what? How do I exist out here? It's the same thing like humans now. You put a human in the Amazon, it's gonna die within a day, But you put a wildebeest in a a gated fenced, feedlot, it's gonna bust out and like go live in the wild again. It's the same thing with us. Like you take an Amazonian, you put him in New York, like it'll be fine. He'll find shelter and food and water and
Yeah,
and ways to exist. You put
put a New Yorker.
and they'll be gone. And it's this process of domestication. So humans have been, domesticated into convenience living. And I listened to someone posted something really interesting, and it said like the hardest thing is to be an Indian. And it's not like it's hard to be an Indian in today's world because of, racism or, um, you know, the ill treatment of Indians or anything, but just to have that awareness that an Indian has, to be connected and wake up with the sun and say your prayers and to recognize that everything you do has an effect on your environment. So you need to, you're here to improve the situation around you, not, and to be a Westerner or a white person just means that you need to make money so that you can buy all the things that you need. So essentially you don't know how to do anything. All you know how to do is go out, do your one task, and then you have all these things available to you. You can go buy the best meal, you can go buy the best clothes, you can go be entertained the best way, you know and you've kind of lost your ability to make the environment around you better, like, and yeah, just
Touche.
something like that, where it's just like it's basically just consciousness. And the thing is Westerners have been domesticated. Our taxes go and feed this pyramid, and this pyramid then goes around and controls the masses, and it makes a ton of money, more money than, you get churches make 10%, wealthiest organizations, governments get 30%, or whatever it is, like super wealthy organizations. And you think the people running these organizations are doing it for your benefit? Like, no, this is domestication of humans. And
Well, and a big part of that is propaganda.
yeah.
And we need to really pay attention to propaganda because it's controlling us now.
Well,
That's the
like,
sophistication.
I don't think that I'm going to be able to connect, like an Indian would to its environment. Like I've been domesticated really hard, and to like be able to filter through, and you can do all the spiritual teachings, and you can like try and understand all these these deep philosophical quarries or whatever, but I don't think that you'd ever get to the state of consciousness and awareness that you would if you were just born into this like deep understanding of what it is to be a human, existing
Well,
really well with the planet.
what we've learned through, the Course in Miracles and through, the transcendental movement, the new thought,
Hmm.
the idea of wiping out and challenging, our beliefs. And this is, from Carl Jung to Aldous Huxley to Alan Watts to Lao Tzu 2,500 years ago, to Jesus,
I mean, the
you
Tibetan
know,
monks are still doing it to this day.
and the Zens,
Yeah.
So we have to deprogram ourselves.
Yeah.
Then we have to question, our beliefs and allow that intuition to be developed. And you can develop your intuition.
You can, but like it's just like taking a damaged body and healing it. Like it's way different than just existing in this pure state than to like do the damage and then try and correct it. You know what I mean?
But the nice thing is,
You can, you,
damage
you
can't,
can, you
damage
can.
can't, yeah.
Yeah, you
And there's
can.
no, you and I have seen that there's no limit to that.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, and we will aspire to do that. But
And that's where, again, I hear you, I get kind of technical and kind of nerdy. But if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to help those people that are really stuck.
no, I
And
appreciate it.
so there's the basics, and there's the simplistic, and there's the
But there's
don't
a
get too
place for,
technical.
yeah, there's
But
also,
when you're really working with some difficult cases, the basics are the most important. But the tiny little nuances, that you see with this testing, then allows you to make the right choices versus fumbling around
yeah,
and just getting on it.
I hear
So
that.
if somebody rotated their diet, that's going to help them. If somebody learned about blood sugar control, that's going to help them. If they're going to exercise, that's going to help them. If they can learn how to forgive, then they need to talk to me, because that's a tough lesson.
Cool.
And
Good to be honest.
I've only really been learning that in the last 10 years of my life. And I have been a spiritual seeker all my life, and have been a part of some kind of a spiritual community all my life. But really, forgiveness was a tough one. And yet, once you learn to do it,
You're free.
then yeah. But it's a continual cleanse.
Yeah.
You have to do it over and over and over and over and over again. And that's where the whole Ho'oponopono,
Yeah.
is so exciting. And, because that's an ancient Hawaiian, I think it's ancient.
Yeah.
And boy, oh boy, is it ever right on. And, and it has to do with not judging in the first place, so that you don't even have to forgive. But, and realizing that what you don't like in somebody else is a reflection of what you don't like in yourself.
It's
So,
the it's the goal of
working on,
creating paradise for one another. Like
yeah.
you create a paradise inside of yourself so that other people can experience it, and vice versa. You get to experience other people's version
And
of,
lo and behold, it changes the world. Whereas if
well,
you do what I try to do of, bludgeoning people over the head and saying, wake up,
that's the
that didn't work
colonial.
so good.
Yeah.
Even though I had good intentions, I was trying,
It creates
but it
hell.
didn't work. So,
Who would you say like your biggest influence for inspiration has been throughout your life? I'm sure you've had many, but like who who has been, leading you in a good direction?
well, Marianne Williamson,
Yeah, but
I
like
learned,
in the beginning, like
well,
who kind of influenced you? Yeah.
my mom,
Yeah.
all the
Cool.
way.
Nice.
Yeah. I mean, she gave me the foundation, and she gave me the freedom to think
Mm-hmm.
and to make mistakes
Mm-hmm.
and to learn from my mistakes. I mean, I'm still trying to save people from their mistakes. And really, those mistakes are what teach us.
Yeah.
So that's where you kind of don't interfere. And by
You don't
I
interfere, but you support, you know, you're there, but you don't
yeah, you
tell them,
love.
you know.
And Dr. Zake,
Yeah.
when he said, Chuck, you're trying to change the world, your forehead's bleeding.
Mm,
If you change yourself, then the world will change around you. And
mm,
that has to do, when I started studying chemistry, I went, oh my gosh, the everything is made up of quarks. And quarks make, electrons and protons and neutrons and the atoms. But the atoms that make up, my bottle are the same atoms that make up the fence here, are the same atoms that make up me. And it's the way that those atoms are arranged that determines if you're the sun or the earth or oil or a plant.
mm,
So it's the spatial arrangement that makes, differences. So by aligning ourselves and getting ourselves aligned, we then affect the whole.
mm,
Whereas if, like I tried to affect out there, didn't work. Man, I'm a protester, I'm a letter writer, I get active in all this stuff, and it hasn't worked. But so what Dr. Zake said, turns out that, I thought he was like reading my mind. Actually, that advice will apply to everybody.
yeah.
So, and when I saw that, and when I really started reading his work, that was his message to everybody.
Yeah.
So I thought he was totally psychic, and he picked me out of the crowd and said, "Hey, man, you're trying to change the
Like,
planet,
yeah.
change yourself." And I went, "Oh my God, how did he know?"
Funny.
But we're all trying to change the planet to some degree.
Yeah.
And it turns out that by, aligning ourselves and by being love, by being forgiving, that, we have the biggest effect on our world.
That's the
It's that
miracle.
it's that old butterfly thing, that the wings of a butterfly stir up a current that can be felt around the world.
Mm,
It always bugged me a little bit. But I found out that the moon is rusting, and they can't figure out what the heck, because there's no oxygen up there. There is water, but how is iron rusting? And they're figuring it out that the solar wind is blowing oxygen from the earth to the moon
damn.
through 250,000 miles through space.
Damn.
And that, so that we're affecting, the moon.
250 miles is not that far away.
250,000, yeah.
Okay. That's still not that far away.
How thick is
Quarter
the
of a million.
atmosphere of the earth? Do you know how thick
15
the atmosphere?
miles?
Yeah,
7. Yeah.
that's crazy. Not hard.
Not
Maybe
that.
20, but
Yeah.
that's hardly nothing.
No. Yeah.
And yet we lose that atmosphere. And these fires are blowing the smoke up 10 miles. So if the atmosphere is, let's say, 20 miles thick, it's going up to 10 miles. And, it's affecting photosynthesis. The smoke, have you seen the radar of the West Coast of
Yeah.
North
All the
America?
fires. Yeah. All the
Ooh,
graphs. It's pretty gnarly. And then it's all going north and then
it's
across.
gonna go, yeah, to Minneapolis and Chicago.
Yeah.
Patty has noticed that her plants aren't growing as well in her yard.
Because there's so much ash, you think? Well, it's
Ash and
also,
smoke.
there's not a lot of water right now. I think
Yeah.
spring is the time where everything just sprouts and starts growing with the sun. And then we're getting close to the equinox, and then it will start to fall. And, plants are affected by that big time. They can't have perpetual growth. There's definitely cycles where it needs to absorb nutrients from the roots, and there's
How do you
water
like
cycles.
Denver going from 100 degrees to 30 degrees in one day?
Yeah, I saw something about that. That was, yeah, I mean, our world. So, what is becoming the biggest health problem, and what is the cause? What is
Depression,
depression is becoming the biggest health issue,
yeah, malnourishment, toxicity.
and environmental collapse. I mean, it's starting to weigh on it, all of us. I mean, we're seeing it with coronavirus, but like the collapse of social, economical, environmental balance is that's pretty debilitating, especially if you had no clue that this was, or like you were in denial, or you didn't fortify. Like, I've been mentally preparing myself for this for like a decade now. I mean, we've been talking about this for a long time, and I've just kind of accepted it as whatever, it's not like, it's going to change when shit hits the fan hard, and maybe all of us get on board. But until then, it seems like such a shit show.
So
And
we have oxygen depletion. The ratio of oxygen. Most of what we breathe is nitrogen.
76% or something.
Yeah, and the oxygen used to be considerably higher, but it's the phytoplankton in the ocean
That
that
created all.
makes most of our oxygen.
Yeah.
And the phytoplankton has decreased by about 50% in the last 60 years.
Is that because of acidification, CO2 absorption, or is that because we've
Mm-hmm.
killed all the wildlife?
CO2,
Is it because the oceans are warming?
but all of the above.
Yeah.
But the algae is disappearing.
I read
I
that
mean,
whales are responsible for fertilizing, whales and dolphins. And we just swam with the whales like a few weekends ago. And I was with like a pod of 40 of them, and they take dumps often, like a lot. And that's fertilizing. They bring the nutrients up to the surface, and then that sunlight feeds all. And then, yeah, so quite interesting. I mean, if you kill all the whales, that was an argument for helping the whales come back, was like, these animals are responsible for the health of the entire ocean. I mean, you could go into a bay in the 1800s and the bay would be covered in whales, like, just same way with salmon, like the streams would be back to back to back to back. So the
people said
abundance,
you could walk across the river on the backs of the salmon.
and the birds would flock across the sky to make the sun blot out, the carrier pigeons, which are now extinct. So the abundance of wildlife, obviously.
70 to 90% of wildlife has disappeared in the last 50 years.
Yeah,
I sent you research. It's just come out this week,
I've
but
heard
it's
that.
shocking.
Yeah.
70, and that's the numbers, the sheer numbers. Other studies have looked at, how many species have been eliminated, but the herds, that's what we're talking about. The herds have just been decimated.
Yeah, it's so
So
perplexing. I mean, but it in an economic system where you need perpetual growth, like that's what's going on. You have people who have more than they could ever need, and yet they still just, it's like a
want
game.
more.
And
And that's why you had the estate taxes. That's why the French killed the aristocrats, in the French Revolution, was that once you have an advantage, that advantage snowballs,
yeah,
and there's nothing that'll stop it. And so, that's this income redistribution, is
it's
really important. And the
like,
Republicans go, "Oh, what are you going to take all the money from the rich and give it to the poor?" Yeah,
the funny part
yeah.
is the extreme wealthy is a small percentage. I saw a graph, and it's like less than 5% of Americans are millionaires. And when we're talking about all these tax things, like, it's not going to affect 95% of us. Yet a lot of people behave and act and pretend like they will someday be one of these guys. So it's like, oh
That's
yeah, we don't want to
that's
affect them. Like, you're making $150,000 a year.
no regulations and no taxes,
Yeah.
but it's screwing them. Yeah, the
Yeah.
people that are getting screwed are the ones that are supporting Trump. It's
I mean,
propaganda.
both political parties are corrupt. I mean, both are supporting the military-industrial complex. I mean, it's
They are,
not like there's a savior on either side. We're being played from both sides. It's not, you
except
know.
for the new progressive Democrats. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez is pretty pure.
There's a
She's
funny meme that goes around that's like, what you wanted, Bernie Sanders and Alexandra Cortez, and then what you got was like Biden and Harris. And it's like, you look at them side by side and they're similar, like old white guy and like younger dark woman, and then like it's the same thing but like total bullshitified. Oh my god, it's like, damn it. But yeah, I stay out of political conversations for the most part, because I think it's just damaging to participate where most people's like ideology or even their understanding is. It's just like, you guys are so brainwashed, yet you think you're smart. Oh my god. And I do that with most every conversation. when, because a lot of people, I've had the luxury of being able to converse with you about really complex subjects and like, and argue with you essentially to like really extract what you're really trying to say. And I can't do that with a lot of people because they get offended. And even though my intention is to like literally like see, you know, let's get to the bottom of this, but so many people's egos are so fragile because
What
they've
were our first arguments about?
religion. Yeah.
That
uh,
was, those were heavy,
yeah, that was
man.
mine
Those were knockdown dragouts.
for hours. I was pretty good. I was pretty
Yeah,
darn
you held
good.
up pretty good, but I was unrelenting. I wasn't gonna let you go that route.
Yeah. Thank
So
God.
I fought hard. That was hard. Those were some of the most intense arguments I've had in my life.
Yeah.
But
And
I
it's,
was,
I see, I mean, I talk with people to this day and they're just zealots for their beliefs. But, um, but yeah, so it's hard to like have the,
I'm glad you remember that.
yeah, I remember them specifically, like driving in the car, like
Yeah, that's what
saying,
I was
well,
gonna say. It was always in the car.
you need to save people's soul before you give them food or something bullshit like this. I'm just like, and a lot of times we're just like repeating, popular arguments that we've heard. So in regards to politics as well, it's like people want to be informed. So they're looking, for the answers, and then they find something that makes sense. And it's spoken with authority, so people will listen. But like if you don't really look down, like if you don't become intuitive about the situation, then you're just going to get pulled into all these like insanities. Essentially, it's insane the way that we operate with politics. It's insane. It's such a waste of resources and time and focus. I mean, we could literally be making the world of Garden of Eden if we didn't keep supporting the fucking war, like these corrupt politicians that bail out the banks and the oil companies and leave everyone else poor. Like there's but yet they've created the majority of people who consider themselves educated or informed with these baseless lies, and it's disturbing. So and even in health too, like I'm really into health and nutrition and like trying to get people to understand the fundamentals and the history of health, um and I don't participate in a lot of conversations either because where people are at is just like, I'm really nice about it, but it's like you guys are focusing on like the wrong kind of stuff. But that's what these videos are for, and we'll
I
have
had
our
a gal that you referred tell me of her experience with intermittent fasting,
mm.
and it completely confirmed my objections.
It's hard though because everyone's doing it with good intentions, and so you're when you start something as heroic as starving yourself for your better health, you're going after it in high hopes, and same with religion and same with all these other things. It's like, so veganism, for instance, like people are doing it for a good cause, and yet if you were to objectively look at the results, it's not so beneficial for your body. And but yet people will still cling to these claims that it is that it's working. I feel really bad, like, and the people of old, like in Mexico, for instance, like where they cultivated corn, that was to feed a large amount of people, and they were able to feed like millions of people on this corn. But they started to recognize that they were having poor health because of it. They would have birth defects, and so they needed to change. They knew intuitively, like, hey, something's going on, we need to change it. And so they added lime, the mineral, into their masa, and that was able to supply
Help the
this.
digestion.
Yeah. So like, how come back then people were in tune with their environment and knew, and now it's like people are just blazing through life, have no concern that alcohol is poisoning them. They still will argue that a glass of wine is fine. Sugar is like, oh, whatever, everyone's doing, like, there is no
Advertising, which is the same thing as propaganda.
but it's just
Public
people.
public relation firms and advertising.
Make more money
Hitler
than
Hitler
everything.
did it with the radio. Hitler was able to convince the good Germans that it was okay to kill Jews,
Fuck.
and they did it. And these were Catholics, and it was the
Yeah.
radio, and it was the first use of electronic propaganda. And the Trump organization hired 200 nerds from Silicon Valley that targeted Facebook, and together with Russian intelligence and propaganda, that's how Trump was elected. And I've heard that today, some of those people that worked for Trump 4 years ago are now working for the opposite side. But the sophistication of propaganda
Mm.
has been refined to
Mm-hmm.
such an incredible degree that what Hitler did, 60 years ago was, elementary to the graduate level of propaganda that's happening right now. There was
Mm.
a woman that's been studying propaganda for 30 or 40 years, and she said the Republican National Convention this year was the best example of propaganda that she's ever seen.
Okay.
100% pure,
Wow.
and it's working.
That's good.
It's
That's some
it's
good
working.
refinement. Wow.
Yeah. So we're, the Russian interference right now is convincing people that Biden's an idiot and that mail-in voting is fraud.
Mm.
And they're setting the stage, for if Biden wins, they're going to contest the election.
Mm.
And Chuck Waters, works in the Costa Contra County up in Vallejo in the elections, and they have the best manager of the whole world, probably, who's head of their election board. This guy comes credentialed with amazing credentials. But he said that Contra Costa, there's 56 counties in California. They're the only one that has a handle on this election. But Scott is the name of their manager. And he's, as far as project management goes, he's the wizard of wizards. He's
Mm.
the guy that the military hired to put out the Kuwait oil fires, because the military generals had no idea how to put out hundreds of oil fires. So they hired this guy to do it. And he's absolutely magnificent. But he said it's still going to be horrible, the election, because of what COVID has done,
Mm.
is just making it really, really hard to hold elections. But he said, we're going to kind of pull it off, but we're going to do a bad job. But the rest of the counties in California are going to fail miserably,
Wow.
as have all the other states.
Wow.
So it's a big, huge mess. And Trump is going to exploit that. And, as I said, this friend of mine read a book 1,000 years old talking about tyranny. And here's the profile of a tyrant.
Yeah.
And Trump fits it 100%. He's like all the other tyrants in
Yeah. He
history.
idolizes them.
Yeah, and he doesn't want to leave the White House, and he's going to do everything he possibly can not to. And his own sister said he lied, cheats, and steals, has his whole life, and he plays dirty. But they're using propaganda.
Well, deception is like the only way that you can really, you know, not the only way, but it's how it's been used. It's like there's some evil shit going on in the world, and deception is the only way to get the people behind it. So whether it be through words and or just straight out lies, that's basically what's going on. It's like these half truths. It's kind of like religion. It's like we'll give you a little bit of the truth, but then we'll sway it to like work for our agenda. So people are interested, and again, they feel like they're being informed, but like in actuality, they're just being led.
All of our institutions leave a lot to be desired,
Yeah, even universities and all these kind of things. I mean,
particularly
authoritarianism is.
particularly universities.
I, when do you think it is in
Univers-
human history that we transitioned? I mean, from like you being your own best interest and best decider to like letting other people
Well,
decide for you.
look what Buddha was saying. Look what Lao Tzu was saying. Look what Jesus was saying. Look what Muhammad was saying
I
thousands of years ago. Look at the Old Testament.
yeah.
It
I
was a long time ago.
I think it's a product of civilizations. I mean, civilizations are a coordination of all these people with different beliefs and ideas, and then you get them all under the same ideology. Um, and before that, it was like people just living in connection with nature and kind of understanding intuitively like what does what. And but yeah, I read something. It was like it was just a meme, but it was like that when people decided that they wanted to control others, that's when the whole problem started. And so, if your desire is to go out there and like, you have control over yourself, maybe your family unit, like you're involved in, like you guys make decisions based on a group. But as soon as you grow from wanting to just control your immediate life, and then you want to organize this massive group of people, like that's a big undertaking, and you're going to do it in whatever way possible. And technology has just been getting better and better. And I always look at like all the everything written on the Egyptian pyramids, like all the hieroglyphs and stuff. And I always say that's propaganda. Like
Mhm.
Egypt was not like a great place for everyone. Like
Mhm.
history shows like, oh, it was so beautiful for the elites. It was. And it's the same case now. Like for the elites, like they're all living great. But for the majority of the population, the ones that go to work, holding the society down, they're not being supported. And yet
And
they
you,
support the elites. So it's like and the way they do it is with religious propaganda and societal propaganda, making other people out to be evil, that you need to go and steal their resources to make your empire better. I mean, it just blows my mind that, I mean, if you went to history class, or if you traveled to another country and you just put yourself into other people's shoes, like why go massacre anybody? Like, what the fuck is up with that mindset where you think like, oh, these people are, like it's okay to go and kill people because they believe certain different things than us.
yeah, we're
It's
still
fucking
doing it
crazy.
today. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah,
But it's always the youth that looks at the old people and says, "You guys are crazy. What's wrong with you, crazy guys?"
mm-hmm.
And so, youth has been historically the ones that lead change. And your age group is and the generation under you,
Well,
boy oh boy,
it's
you better wrestle control from my generation pretty damn quick, or you ain't gonna have much longer.
it's shitty because everyone just wants to live like a good life, like we only have one life. You want to experience good things. And so,
50% of your generation is living at home with their family right now. 50%.
geez, damn.
So how would you like to come and live with me, Stuart?
No, I'm good. I've flown the coop. I'm good. um yeah, that's crazy.
Well,
Yeah.
the chimes are ringing. Our 20 minutes is over.
Yeah, that was good. I really appreciated having some questions. That was fun. Let's yeah, we're done. Let's enjoy our day. uh,
We did cover some important stuff.
yeah, totally.
Whether or not people understand it or not, we did cover some important stuff that most people do not get.
Yeah, I think that it was explained in a really really well delivered way for sure. Yeah. I also would like to just talk about a topic without even the precedent, or like without the focus being on health, and just like to just dive into a topic, just like, whoa, this is really interesting. And you know
That is fun.
just like
Hey, did
all
you
the
see? I sent you an email of a new group, Charles Eisenstein or somebody like that.
okay.
He's a very intellectual dude,
Mm-hmm.
and he's starting a new group that you have to kind of audition to be part of,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's where you're civil, where you discuss hard stuff with other people without being critical and judgmental.
That's
And
awesome.
so yeah, so look it up. I've sent you the link to
It's
that
like a
group.
Facebook group or something.
Not sure exactly how it's going to happen,
Cool.
but there's this other guy, Rothschild guy, that I Phil Roth Roth something another.
Yeah.
These are two just exquisitely intellectual people
Yeah.
that, are trying to, put together a tribe.
Cool. Rad. Thank you.
So, yeah, check that out and see if it's something that rings your bells.
Okay. Cool.
I tell
Oh,
you, they're the only person that I have really any contact with at all up here is this 90-year-old guy.
yeah.
And I enjoy talking to him. But other than that, I'm a hermit.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. And you, and Patty. And Patty
Well,
reminds me, and Chuck Waters every now and then I get to talk to.
yeah.
But she says, if you've got me, you've got Stuart, and you've got Chuck,
Yeah.
you're lucky. Because I say, I want more friends.
Yeah. I have too many friends. You can have some of mine.
Yeah, I am so blessed to be up here
Yeah.
away from the maddening crowd. This is like North Shore.
Yeah.
It's smaller than North Shore. We have 2,000 full-time residents here.
Yeah.
And the nearest town is 45 minutes away.
It's just a nature paradise.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect environment. Same here. Just diving and mountains and the ocean that's warm. Pretty soon to be monstrous waves. I guess we're going to have a big swell on Thursday. So it's coming. Time to dust off all the boards and wax them up and then throw myself into these. I've noticed the first day that I went out, my neck was like so sore. And I've been surfing maybe once a week or bodyboarding once a week, but like, I don't know what it was, but I went out surfing for a good hour and I got my first session. I hit the
Just
reef.
having your head up like this on a board is tough.
Yeah. But like my whole body, and I was really exhausted, but like so content. I don't think there's anything else that I enjoy more than just like playing in big waves. And the
After
sessions that
skiing, after
ski,
skiing up on Casper when we were kids,
yeah,
that the evening was like this, even though you're exhausted, there was this glow.
yeah. Camping is like that too, but with all those things, like I could get over skiing in like a week, or you know what I mean? Like I can get my fill of camping and be like, okay, I'm done. But with surfing, it's like, as long as there's waves, like I'm really happy. And
Amen.
I think that
I
part of it, I'm really happy to go out there every time there's good waves or good conditions. And I think the part of it is it's like this, it is like a meditation where you're in this kind of hostile environment and you're having to dodge all these things and line yourself up, and it's strenuous physically and mentally. And then another thing that was interesting is like all summer long, everyone's really peaceful. No one's all adrenalined out. And then the waves start coming. Everyone kind of gets into this like animalistic mode. And the thing is when you're out at these peaks, like your sharks all hunting the same wave, you know? And so you have to like be cordial, but also aggressive. And, all summer long, I've just been like super chill. And then I notice a change in me happens when the summer comes around. It's pure necessity. It's like, if you want to get your wave and a good wave, you kind of have to be this, like, you have to go into animalistic mode. And I don't like,
Alpha. You got to be alpha.
I really am against it in the beginning. I'm like, oh no, I don't want to get in this person's way. And then by the end of the season, I just don't give a shit. And I'm just like, like I'm here, like this is my whatever. And it's almost embarrassing, but it's like, it's what you have to do. But yeah, it changes you. They say that surfers are kind of more selfish assholes in comparison to a lot of other sports like skating or snowboarding, because like you can wait your turn. Like the skate ramp isn't going anywhere. And with
That's
waves,
interesting.
it's like
Yeah.
you only have so much time. The waves are every 15 minutes. There's a set. There's only a few waves in a set. So like there's this
Well,
mode
and
that,
especially when you start surfing with the elite crowd.
oh, they're awful. Yeah, but they push you. Like yeah, yeah, for sure. The elite crowd is, and that's what the North Shore is too. It's like everyone who's out here like really knows really well what they're doing.
Because they fucking want that wave, and they're willing to
Yeah.
fight for it.
Yeah. I've been really studying pipeline this year. I want to be able to get like a really deep, nice setup, full bottom turn speed through the barrel. Because mostly I'm sitting on the shoulder and just like getting the ones that other people didn't drop into, and it's this very late drop, and I'm just like getting this barrel, but not exactly all the speed I need to get out of it, which is fun. But it'd be fun to get like a full, like
But
a
the
full.
higher up on the wave you go through the barrel, the harder and the better. If you get too far down, you're gone. Seems like the top guys try to get up on that wall as much as they can.
Yeah, because that's where you keep generating speed. Yeah,
And
you want to
then
be.
when you get spit,
What actually sucks you back and then pushes you out. So like
Jesus,
this thing like,
Jesus,
and then you
Jesus.
get, and then that's the goal, is to get spit out after the spit, because it means that you like were really, really, high up and deep. And
And you
the
got to grab. A lot of them have to grab the rail.
yeah, otherwise you get thrown off it. Yeah, I'm gonna attempt this year to surf it, which is gonna be a different experience than bodyboarding it. So
Well,
yeah,
make sure you spend a month getting in shape.
I'm fairly, and I've been running consistently. I've been doing like 30-minute runs a few times a week, and I've been like, yeah, just doing body stuff. I feel pretty strong, but of course just surfing too. And also, like, I noticed that getting good rest is like crucial for having your wits about you when you're out there. And since Lily and I have been together, I've definitely like changed my routine as far as sleeping goes, and just like late nights, and I've noticed how it's had an effect on my focus big time, and just my ability to like.
Is she
And
going to do the testing or not?
yeah, she is.
She better. If she's leaving Wednesday, she should get a hold of me.
Yeah, yeah,
And maybe I could send it to Tennessee or wherever she's going.
yeah, yeah,
Otherwise, it's going to slip away.
yeah. No,
I
I think.
sent you an email detailing. I sent you a text with regards to the cost, and I misjudged. I mean, I've given her a better deal than I was even going to. But but I did send you the description that I sent to Nadia.
Yeah, cool.
It impresses me. I mean, what these tests do, fuck. And if people knew them as well as I do, I mean, these are just such fabulous tests. What I'm doing now versus when I was working in Tijuana,
Mm,
or when I was working with Bill Timmons.
yeah. Well, it's gonna be exciting. I think we should do the clinic here, I guess, just somewhere on Oahu. Just make it easy. I know where all the resources are, and either rent out a really bitchin' house, or we have a facility, and then we'll get a lot of other practitioners involved too that want to do like lead courses, meditation and yoga and massage and all that kind of stuff. And I already kind of I'm already like linked into that group. So but yeah, the biggest thing is just recording everything, and that'll be like really special to show, like, hey, look, like this is how you really coordinate the effort to heal.
Look no further.
Yeah, that's
It's
gonna be.
hard to find any place that's going to do what we can do.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll be able to influence more to 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 get on this, people who want to do it, who are
Talk to
already.
that guy in Australia and have him get a hold of me.
Oh well.
Or
All right.
maybe I should try getting back a hold of him.
I mean, I can get a hold of him.
Okay.
But yeah, thanks for taking care of people that I recommend to you. And yeah, I'm gonna stop
Okay, this
recording.
was fun as usual.
Yeah,
Hope it'll be interesting to see the feedback we get.
yeah, I think it's a really good one actually. It went over 20 minutes, but I think it was more direct.
You
I
should
like
cut
it.
out all the political stuff at the end.
I don't edit any of this. It's just raw.
Oh God.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
There's something about just being like authentically yourself, and a lot of people are really afraid to do that, but it almost like you need to do that in order to be enticing. So it's like, if you're playing it safe, like that's no different than everyone else. But if you're presenting new ideas and new information in a radical way, that like it's Yeah, it's kind of necessary for marketing purposes. But
It's fun. It's fun talking to you always.
yeah, totally.
Okay, I'm gonna go eat.
All right, love you.